My name is Margaret. I'm 68 years old, and for over 5 decades of my life, I believed I was walking on the most sacred path that existed. I was born and raised within the Jehovah's Witnesses congregation here in a small town in rural Ohio, a place called Harmony Springs. My mother, Ruth, was already one of the most respected pioneers in the region, and since I was a little girl, she taught me that our family had been chosen by Jehovah to bring the truth to the world. I drank in every word like it was crystal clear water in the middle of a desert. When I was just 15 years old in 1971, I was baptized in the cold waters of Miller's Pond on the outskirts of town, surrounded by more than 200 brothers singing songs of praise. I remember it like it was yesterday, the moment I came up from that water, shivering from cold and emotion, feeling that now I truly belonged to God's people. My mother was crying tears of joy, and the elder responsible for the ceremony, Brother William, hugged me tight and said I was a blessed young woman, that Jehovah had special plans for my life. In that moment, I felt like my entire existence made sense, that I had found my place in the universe. The following years were filled with a dedication that frightens me when I think about it now. I would wake up before 5 in the morning to study the Watchtower publications, memorizing Bible verses as if my salvation depended on every word etched in my memory. I attended every meeting of the week, never missing even when I was sick. On Saturday mornings, I went out in field service door to door, knocking under scorching sun or torrential rain, always with a smile on my face and a magazine in my hand, believing I was saving eternal lives with every conversation. At 22, I married Robert, an exemplary ministerial servant I met at a district assembly in Columbus. He was everything a young Jehovah's Witness woman could dream of: dedicated, obedient, with biblical knowledge that impressed even the oldest elders. Our ceremony was simple, held in the Kingdom Hall itself, without worldly music, without dancing, without anything that could displease Jehovah, just spiritual songs and upbuilding words. Robert and I promised each other that we would build a theocratic family, that we would raise children who would honor God's name. And that's exactly what we tried to do when our 3 children were born. First came Daniel in 1976, a boy with bright eyes and an easy smile who showed interest in spiritual things from an early age. Then came Rebecca in 1978, a sweet and obedient girl who never caused trouble, always willing to participate in congregation activities. Finally, Samuel was born in 1981, the youngest who brought joy wherever he went, but who also had a natural curiosity that sometimes worried me. I raised my children strictly following the organization's guidelines. They didn't celebrate birthdays, Christmas, Easter, or any holiday that had pagan origins. When other children at school sang happy birthday or participated in Halloween parties, my children stood aside, instructed to explain that their religion didn't allow such practices. Many times they came home sad, questioning why they were different from their classmates, but I always comforted them, explaining that they were special, that they were part of God's chosen people, that soon, at Armageddon, all the other children who didn't know the truth would be destroyed, but they would be safe in the earthly paradise. Robert and I made sure our children actively participated in congregational life. Daniel, from age 8, was already making comments at meetings, his memorized little answers drawing approving smiles from the older brothers. Rebecca participated in the Theocratic Ministry School, rehearsing presentations that demonstrated how a young Christian woman should behave. Samuel, even being the youngest, already knew several Bible passages by heart and loved it when we let him hold the publications during field service. Our life revolved completely around the Harmony Springs congregation. Robert soon became an elder, a position that brought great pride to our family, but also enormous responsibility. He spent hours in elders' meetings, taking care of the congregation's spiritual matters, counseling brothers with problems, preparing parts for assemblies. I became a regular pioneer, dedicating 70 hours a month to preaching, putting household chores in second place because service to Jehovah always came first. Our routine was mathematical and inflexible. Monday was the day to study the Watchtower as a family, sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, each with our marked magazine, discussing the articles paragraph by paragraph. Tuesday we had the meeting at the Kingdom Hall, where we studied doctrinal publications and heard ministry parts. Thursday was the theocratic ministry school meeting, where we all practiced the art of teaching Bible truths. Saturday morning was sacred for field service, and Sunday we had the public meeting, where visiting speakers edified us with Bible-based talks. For decades, this routine brought me a sense of security and purpose I had never experienced before. I knew exactly what my role was in God's great plan, knew I was in the right place, doing the right things, raising children who would faithfully serve Jehovah. When other mothers worried about their children's uncertain future, I slept peacefully knowing mine would be protected at Armageddon and live forever on a paradisiac earth. The people in town saw us as a different family, but respected. Robert was known for his honesty in business, never lied, never cheated, always kept his word. I was respected by the neighbors for my dedication to the family and my irreproachable conduct. Our children stood out at school for their education and exemplary behavior, even being different from their classmates. We were a living showcase of what it meant to be a true Christian family. I remember at district assemblies when we would arrive with our 3 well-dressed children, all in little suits and proper dresses, other families would look at us with admiration. Robert was frequently invited to give experiences about raising children in the truth, and I participated in demonstration parts about how a Christian wife should support her husband in service to God. Our children were used as examples in talks about Christian education. We were considered a model family, blessed by Jehovah. During all these years, it never crossed my mind to question even a single word of the teachings I received. When the organization changed some doctrinal understanding, I simply accepted that it was new divine light being revealed. When questions arose about prophetic dates that weren't fulfilled, I believed they were necessary adjustments in understanding. When I saw families being destroyed by disfellowshipping, I thought it was necessary discipline to maintain the congregation's purity. My faith was blind, absolute, unquestionable. Until the day came when this blind faith began to clash with something much more powerful, a mother's love. And it was this conflict that would change my life forever, forcing me to choose between obeying an organization I considered perfect or protecting the children God had given me. A choice I never imagined I would have to make, but which would become the most important one of my life. As my children grew older, I began to notice subtle changes in their attitudes toward the truth. Daniel, who had always been the most enthusiastic about spiritual activities, started asking questions that made me uncomfortable. He was now 17, a bright young man who excelled in his high school classes, particularly in science and history. One evening during our family watchtower study, he raised his hand after I read a paragraph about the creation account. "Mom, my biology teacher showed us evidence about evolution today. Carbon dating shows that some fossils are millions of years old. How do we reconcile this with the Bible's timeline?" Daniel asked with genuine curiosity, not rebellion. Robert immediately stiffened in his chair. "Son, we don't question God's word. The world's wisdom is foolishness to God. Your teacher is part of Satan's system, trying to undermine your faith." But I could see in Daniel's eyes that this answer wasn't satisfying him anymore. He nodded respectfully, but I noticed he wrote something in his notebook that he quickly closed when his father looked his way. Rebecca, now 15, was also beginning to show signs of what the elders would later call spiritual weakness. She had always been my little helper, eager to please, but lately she seemed withdrawn during meetings. One day, while we were preparing for field service, she asked me a question that pierced my heart. "Mama, why can't I have friends at school? Sarah invited me to her birthday party, and when I explained why I couldn't go, she looked so sad. She said she didn't understand why God would be angry about celebrating someone's life." Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. I gave her the standard answer about pagan origins and true worship, but even as the words left my mouth, they felt hollow. Why would a loving God be offended by a child celebrating another child's birthday? I pushed these thoughts away, attributing them to Satan's influence, but they lingered in the back of my mind like shadows I couldn't quite shake. Samuel, at 12, was the most concerning of all. His natural curiosity, which I had once found endearing, was now leading him to ask questions that made Robert increasingly frustrated. During a congregation book study, When Brother William was explaining about the faithful and discreet slave class, Samuel raised his small hand. "Brother William, how do we know that the governing body in New York is chosen by God? Did angels come down and tell them, like they did with the prophets in the Bible?" The innocent question caused an uncomfortable silence in the room. Several elders exchanged glances, and I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. Brother William cleared his throat and explained about spiritual discernment and progressive revelation, but Samuel persisted. "But Moses had a burning bush, and Daniel had visions. What signs did the governing body have?" Robert quickly silenced him with a stern look, but I could see that Samuel's question had troubled some of the other congregation members. After the meeting, Brother William pulled Robert and me aside. "Brother Robert, Sister Margaret, I'm concerned about young Samuel's attitude. These questions show a spirit of rebellion that needs to be corrected before it spreads to other young ones in the congregation. Perhaps some additional study and stricter discipline at home would help." That night, Robert was furious. He made Samuel write out Bible verses about obedience 50 times and forbade him from asking questions during meetings for the next month. But as I watched my youngest son mechanically copying scripture, I felt something break inside my chest. This beautiful, intelligent child was being punished for using the mind God had given him. The situation with my children continued to deteriorate over the following months. Daniel started declining to participate in field service, claiming he had too much homework. When Robert confronted him, Daniel finally exploded with frustration that had been building for months. "Dad, I've been doing research. The organization has made so many failed predictions. They said Armageddon would come in 1975, then when it didn't happen, they said it was soon, very soon. How many times can they be wrong and still claim to speak for God? And what about all the doctrinal changes? If they had the truth from the beginning, why does it keep changing?" Robert's face turned red with anger. "You've been reading apostate literature. Who has been poisoning your mind with these lies?" But Daniel stood his ground, his voice shaking but determined. "I haven't read anything forbidden, Dad. I just used the organization's own publications. I went to the library and looked up old Watchtowers and Awake magazines. The predictions are all there, in their own words. I'm not making this up." The confrontation that followed was the worst fight our family had ever experienced. Robert accused Daniel of being influenced by demons, of allowing pride to corrupt his heart. Daniel accused his father of being brainwashed, of choosing an organization over his own son's legitimate questions. I stood there, frozen between them, my heart breaking as I watched my family tear itself apart. Rebecca, who had witnessed the entire argument, ran to her room crying. Later that night, I found her writing in her diary. "I wish we were a normal family," she had written. "I wish Dad would listen instead of just getting angry. I wish Mom would stand up for us sometimes." Those words cut deeper than any knife. Was I failing my children by not standing up for them? But how could I go against everything I had believed for my entire life? How could I doubt the organization that had given my life meaning and purpose? The pressure from the congregation intensified as word spread about Daniel's questions. Sister Patricia, an elder's wife who had always been critical of other families, made pointed comments about the importance of keeping one's household in subjection to the truth. Brother James, our circuit overseer during his next visit, gave a talk specifically about the dangers of higher education and independent thinking, looking directly at our family several times during his presentation. I began to feel like we were being watched, judged, whispered about. Other mothers stopped, including me in their conversations after meetings. When I approached groups of sisters, their discussions would suddenly stop, and they would find excuses to disperse. The sense of community and belonging that had sustained me for decades was slowly crumbling. One particularly painful incident occurred during a congregation picnic. Samuel was playing with some younger children when he innocently mentioned something he had learned about dinosaurs at school. One of the mothers overheard and immediately pulled her children away, loudly stating that she didn't want them exposed to evolutionary lies. Samuel came running to me, confused and hurt, asking why the other kids couldn't play with him anymore. But perhaps you know what, my dear friends? Sometimes it takes losing everything you thought was precious to discover what truly matters. And as I watched my children suffer for simply using their minds, for asking honest questions, for being the intelligent, curious individuals God had created them to be, I began to realize that maybe, just maybe, the problem wasn't with my children. If you're listening to this story and it's touching your heart, if you understand the pain of watching a family torn apart by rigid religious control, please let me know in the comments below. Your support means everything to this old woman trying to share her truth. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. Not because I want numbers, but because I want to build a community of people who understand that love should never be conditional, that families should never be destroyed in the name of faith. Your subscription tells me I'm not alone in believing that truth and love can coexist, that questioning and faith don't have to be enemies. The breaking point came on a cold February evening in 1999. Daniel, now 18, had been accepted to Ohio State University with a partial scholarship for his academic achievements. It should have been a moment of celebration, a proud mother's dream come true. Instead, it became the catalyst for the destruction of everything I had held dear for 50 years of my life. The letter from Ohio State University arrived on a Tuesday morning while Robert was at work and the children were at school. I held the envelope in my trembling hands, seeing Daniel's name printed in official university letterhead, and I knew immediately that this piece of paper would change everything. When Daniel came home that afternoon and saw the letter on the kitchen counter, his face lit up with a joy I hadn't seen in months. "Mom, I got in. Full academic scholarship for pre-med. Can you believe it? I can actually become a doctor and help people." He spun me around the kitchen, his excitement infectious. And for just a moment, I allowed myself to feel proud of my brilliant son. But then reality crashed down on me like a cold wave. Higher education was strongly discouraged by the organization. Medical school meant 8 years of intense exposure to worldly thinking, evolutionary teaching, and association with unbelievers. When Robert came home and found Daniel showing the acceptance letter to his siblings, the explosion was immediate and devastating. "Absolutely not. You will not waste your life pursuing worldly wisdom when Armageddon is so close. A true Christian young man pioneers after high school, serves Jehovah full-time, and supports himself with part-time work. This university nonsense is nothing but pride and ambition." Daniel's face went white, then red with anger. "Dad, I can use my medical training to help people. Isn't that what Jesus did? He healed the sick. How is wanting to heal people wrong?" But Robert was beyond reasoning, his voice rising to a level that made the windows seem to vibrate. "Don't you dare compare your worldly ambitions to Jesus Christ. You're being deceived by Satan, led astray by the very education system that teaches evolution and undermines faith in God. I won't have an apostate living under my roof." The word apostate hit the room like a physical blow. Rebecca gasped, Samuel started crying, and Daniel stood frozen in shock. That night, after the younger children were in bed, Robert made a phone call that would seal our family's fate. He called Brother William and requested an immediate meeting with the Judicial Committee. "My son is showing clear signs of apostasy," I heard him say through the thin walls. "He's rejecting theocratic counsel, pursuing higher education against organizational guidance, and questioning fundamental doctrines. I believe formal action needs to be taken." I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, listening to Robert's heavy breathing beside me, wondering how the man I had loved for 26 years could so easily call for the spiritual destruction of his own son. In the next room, I could hear Daniel crying quietly into his pillow, and my heart felt like it was being torn into pieces. This was my baby, the little boy who used to fall asleep in my lap during long convention sessions, who practiced his first Bible reading with me in the kitchen, who told me he wanted to serve Jehovah forever. The Judicial Committee meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. Brother William, Brother Charles, and Brother Thompson would hear Daniel's case and determine whether he was repentant for his rebellious attitude, or if he needed to be disfellowshipped to protect the congregation from his influence. I begged Robert to cancel the meeting, to give Daniel more time, to let me work with him privately, but his mind was made up. "Margaret, you're letting motherly affection cloud your judgment. The organization must come first. If we don't take a stand now, he'll corrupt his siblings and damage our reputation in the congregation." Sometimes love means making hard decisions. But as I looked into my husband's cold, determined eyes, I wondered when love had become synonymous with abandonment. The day before the Judicial Committee meeting, I did something I had never done in my entire life as a Jehovah's Witness. I went to the public library and began researching the very things Daniel had mentioned. With shaking hands, I pulled out bound volumes of old Watchtower magazines and began reading the predictions about 1975. There it was, in black and white, the organization's own words stating clearly that Armageddon would come in that year. When it didn't happen, subsequent articles blamed the rank and file for reading too much into the predictions, but the evidence was undeniable. I spent hours in that library, reading about doctrinal changes, failed prophecies, and policies that had torn families apart. Each page I turned felt like another crack in the foundation of my faith. How had I never seen this before? How had I blindly accepted every change, every new explanation, every shifting doctrine without question? The woman who walked out of that library was not the same one who had walked in. That evening, I sat Daniel down for what I knew might be our last honest conversation. Son, I need you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, I love you. You are my child, and nothing will ever change that. Daniel looked at me with eyes that seemed decades older than his 18 years. Mom, I know you love me, but are you going to stand by and watch them destroy our family? Are you going to let them tell you that loving your own son is wrong? His questions pierced through every defense I had left. What kind of mother was I if I didn't protect my children? What kind of love was conditional on perfect obedience to human rules? The Judicial Committee meeting was held in the small back room of the Kingdom Hall, where I had attended thousands of meetings over the decades. I wasn't allowed inside, but I sat in the main hall with Rebecca and Samuel, listening to the muffled voices through the thin walls. After 2 hours, the door opened and Daniel emerged, his face pale but resolved. Behind him came the 3 elders, their expressions grim and self-righteous. Brother William approached us with the kind of solemn gravity usually reserved for funeral announcements. Sister Margaret, Brother Robert, after careful consideration and prayer, the committee has determined that Daniel is unrepentant in his rebellious attitude toward theocratic authority. He refuses to abandon his pursuit of higher education, continues to question organizational teachings, and shows no remorse for his apostate thinking. Effective immediately, he is disfellowshipped from the congregation. The words hit me like physical blows. My son, my firstborn, was now spiritually dead in the eyes of the organization. No member of the congregation could speak to him, eat with him, or acknowledge his existence. Even family members were expected to limit contact to only necessary family business. Rebecca began sobbing uncontrollably, and Samuel ran from the room, unable to process what was happening. That night, Daniel packed his belongings, while Robert sat in the living room, reading his Bible as if nothing had happened. I helped my son fold his clothes, both of us crying silently, knowing that this might be the last time I could openly show him love without facing consequences myself. As he carried his suitcase to the door, Daniel turned to me one final time. Mom, they're going to pressure you to cut me off completely. They'll tell you it's for my own good, that shunning me will bring me back to the truth. But please remember that I'm still your son. I'm still the same person who loves you, who appreciates everything you taught me about kindness and compassion and standing up for what's right. Don't let them kill the love in your heart. After Daniel left, staying with a school friend whose parents had offered him temporary shelter, our house became a tomb of silence and grief. Rebecca barely spoke, moving through her days like a ghost. Samuel asked repeatedly when Daniel was coming home, unable to understand why his big brother couldn't visit anymore. And I felt like I was dying inside, piece by piece, as the reality of what we had lost began to sink in. The congregation rallied around us with what they called loving support, but which felt more like surveillance. Sister Patricia brought meals and stayed to make sure I wasn't secretly communicating with Daniel. Brother James visited regularly to encourage Robert in his faithful stand, and to remind me that association with a disfellowshipped person, even my own son, would demonstrate a lack of respect for Jehovah's arrangement. But as the days turned into weeks, something unexpected began happening inside me. Instead of feeling more convinced that the organization was right, I found myself questioning everything more deeply than ever before. If God was love, as the Bible clearly stated, how could he require parents to treat their children as dead? If Jesus had associated with tax collectors and sinners, showing them compassion and mercy, why were we forbidden from showing love to our own family members who had different beliefs? The breaking point came exactly 3 weeks after Daniel's disfellowshipping. I was at the grocery store when I saw him in the produce section, looking thin and tired, clearly struggling to make ends meet on his part-time job while preparing for college. Every instinct in my body screamed to run to him, to hug him, to ask if he was eating enough, if he needed money, if he was taking care of himself. Instead, following the organization's rules, I turned and walked away, leaving my own child standing alone among the vegetables. That night, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop crying. What had I become? What kind of mother abandons her child when he needs her most? And that's when I made the decision that would cost me everything, but give me back my soul. I was going to love my son, no matter what the consequences. The organization could take my reputation, my friends, my position, even my marriage. But they could not take my love. The first time I secretly contacted Daniel, my hands were shaking so violently I could barely dial the phone number. It was a Sunday afternoon, while Robert was at an elders' meeting and the other children were napping. I had found Daniel's new phone number written on a piece of paper in Rebecca's backpack, evidence that she too was struggling with the cruel separation imposed on our family. When I heard my son's voice answer the phone, I broke down completely. "Daniel, it's Mom. I'm so sorry, honey. I'm so sorry for everything." Through my tears, I could hear him crying too, and for several minutes we just sobbed together across the phone line, finally able to express the grief that had been suffocating us both for weeks. "Mom, I thought you hated me. I thought I had lost you forever," Daniel whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I've been sleeping on Jake's couch, working double shifts at the restaurant, trying to save money for a small apartment. But the hardest part wasn't the money or the exhaustion. It was thinking that my own mother didn't love me anymore. I never stopped loving you, not for 1 second," I told him fiercely. "They told me that cutting you off was an act of love, that it would help you come back to the truth. But how can abandoning someone you love ever be loving? How can causing pain be the same as showing care?" From that moment on, I lived a double life that nearly destroyed my sanity. During the day, I played the role of the obedient Jehovah's Witness wife and mother, attending meetings, participating in field service, maintaining the facade that I supported the organization's decision about Daniel. But in secret, stolen moments, I was the mother I needed to be. I would meet Daniel at a small diner outside of town, bringing him home-cooked meals and clean laundry. I saw how thin he had become, how the stress of being completely cut off from his family was affecting his health and his studies. The bright, confident young man who had received that scholarship was becoming hollow-eyed and withdrawn, jumping at every sound, constantly looking over his shoulder as if expecting to be discovered. "Mom, sometimes I wonder if they're right," Daniel confessed during one of our secret meetings. "Maybe I'm being selfish. Maybe I should just give up college, come back, and do whatever they want. At least then our family could be together again." The desperation in his voice terrified me. "Daniel, listen to me carefully. You are not selfish for wanting to use your mind, for wanting to help people, for asking honest questions. The selfish ones are the people who would rather destroy a family than admit they might be wrong about something." But maintaining this secret relationship was taking an enormous toll on everyone involved. Rebecca, now 16, had become withdrawn and rebellious in ways that alarmed even me. She started skipping meetings, claiming to be sick when it was time for field service, and arguing with Robert about rules that seemed arbitrary and harsh. One evening, she confronted me directly about the hypocrisy she was witnessing. "Mom, I know you're seeing Daniel. I saw you at Miller's Diner last Tuesday when I was walking home from school. Are you going to lie to me about it?" Her directness caught me off guard, and I realized that my attempts to protect my children from the truth were failing miserably. "Rebecca, yes, I've seen your brother. I couldn't bear the thought of him thinking we don't love him anymore." I waited for her response, terrified that she might report me to her father or the elders. Instead, she threw her arms around me and began crying. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you for not abandoning him completely. I've been so angry at everyone, at God, at the organization, at Dad. But knowing that you still love Daniel gives me hope that maybe love is stronger than all these stupid rules." Samuel, now 13, was perhaps suffering the most of all. He idolized his older brother and couldn't understand why Daniel had suddenly disappeared from his life. He would sneak into Daniel's old room and sit on the bed, holding his brother's baseball glove or looking through photo albums. One night, I found him crying in the hallway outside Daniel's room. "Mama, why won't Jehovah let Daniel come home? Daniel was always nice to everyone. He helped old people at meetings. He was kind to animals. He never said bad words. Why would God want to keep families apart?" Samuel's innocent questions echoed the doubts that were growing stronger in my own heart every day. The pressure from the congregation was becoming unbearable. Brother William made increasingly frequent visits to our home, ostensibly to encourage Robert, but clearly to monitor our family's compliance with the shunning arrangement. During one particularly uncomfortable visit, he looked around the house as if searching for evidence of Daniel's presence. "Sister Margaret, I hope you understand the importance of maintaining firm boundaries with disfellowshipped individuals, even family members. Any contact beyond absolute necessity can undermine the disciplinary process and demonstrate a lack of respect for Jehovah's arrangement." His cold eyes seemed to see right through me, and I wondered if he suspected my secret meetings with Daniel. Sister Patricia had appointed herself as my unofficial supervisor, calling daily to check on my spiritual welfare and offering to accompany me everywhere to provide encouragement. Her constant presence made it nearly impossible to maintain contact with Daniel, and I began to feel like a prisoner in my own life. The breaking point came on a cold March evening when Robert discovered a text message on my phone from Daniel thanking me for the care package I had secretly delivered to his apartment. Robert's face went through a series of expressions I had never seen before: shock, betrayal, rage, and finally, a cold determination that chilled me to the bone. "You've been sneaking around behind my back, undermining the organization's discipline, acting like a rebellious teenager instead of a mature Christian woman," Robert said, his voice eerily calm. "I have no choice but to report this to the elders. Your behavior is scandalous and could stumble others in the congregation." "Robert, he's our son. How can you put rules above your own child?" I pleaded, but I could see that my husband had already made up his mind. The man I had loved and respected for decades was choosing an organization over his wife and son. He stopped being our son when he chose apostasy over the truth. And now you're following the same path. I won't allow your weakness to destroy what's left of this family's reputation in the congregation. That night, Robert called Brother William and reported my rebellious behavior. Within hours, I received a phone call summoning me to a judicial committee meeting to answer charges of disrespecting the disfellowshipping arrangement and undermining theocratic discipline. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the war between love and obedience that had been raging in my heart for months was about to reach its conclusion. I had to choose between the organization that had defined my entire adult life and the love that defined my very existence as a mother. The choice, when it came down to it, was actually quite simple. I called Daniel that night and told him everything. "Son, I'm probably going to be disfellowshipped too. They found out about our meetings, and they're not going to forgive me for choosing love over their rules." Daniel was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to lose everything because of me. Maybe you should just tell them you won't see me anymore. Maybe you can save your marriage, your friendships, your whole life." "Daniel," I said firmly, "my life without you isn't worth saving. A marriage that requires me to abandon my children isn't worth preserving. Friends who expect me to choose rules over love aren't really friends at all. Tomorrow, I'm going to walk into that committee meeting and tell them exactly what I think about their cruel, unloving policies." For the first time in months, I slept peacefully that night. The war was over, and love had won. Whatever consequences I faced, I would face them with a clear conscience, knowing that I had chosen to be the mother God intended me to be, rather than the robot the organization demanded I become. The next evening would bring the most important conversation of my life, one that would cost me everything I thought I valued, but give me back everything that truly mattered. I was ready to face whatever came next, because I was finally free to love my children without conditions, without fear, and without shame. The Judicial Committee meeting was held on a Thursday evening in the same back room where Daniel had been condemned just 2 months earlier. As I walked through the Kingdom Hall doors for what I somehow knew would be the last time, I felt an unexpected sense of peace wash over me. The walls that had once felt like sanctuary now seemed like prison bars, and I was about to walk free. Brother William, Brother Charles, and Brother Thompson sat behind a small table like judges in a courtroom, their faces grave and self-righteous. They had already made their decision before I even entered the room. This meeting was merely a formality, a chance for them to demonstrate their authority and perhaps extract a confession that would justify their predetermined punishment. "Sister Margaret," Brother William began, his voice dripping with false compassion, "we've called this meeting because we've received disturbing reports about your conduct regarding your disfellowshipped son. As you know, maintaining the purity of the congregation requires that we strictly adhere to biblical principles about shunning those who have been removed from our midst." I looked at these 3 men who had known me for decades, who had watched me pioneer for years, who had seen me raise my children in the truth, who had benefited from countless meals I had prepared for congregation gatherings. Now they sat before me like strangers, ready to destroy my life for the crime of loving my own child. "Gentlemen," I said quietly, "before we begin, I have a question for you. Do any of you have children?" All 3 nodded. "And if one of your children was hurt, hungry, or in need, would you turn your back on them because someone told you it was God's will?" Brother Charles shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Sister Margaret, you're trying to appeal to human emotions instead of scriptural principles. The Bible clearly states that we must hate what is bad, and apostasy is among the worst sins imaginable." "Apostasy," I repeated slowly. "And what exactly did my son do that was so apostate?" He asked questions about doctrine. He wanted to pursue higher education to help people. He used the mind that God gave him to think critically about teachings that didn't align with Scripture. If that's apostasy, then I'm proud to be the mother of an apostate. The room fell silent. I could see shock and anger building in their faces, but I wasn't finished. 50 years of suppressed thoughts and feelings were finally finding their voice. "Let me tell you what I think is truly apostate," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Apostate is telling a mother she can't love her child. Apostate is destroying families in the name of God. Apostate is claiming to speak for the Almighty while demonstrating none of His love, mercy, or compassion. Apostate is building an organization that puts rules above relationships and power above people." Brother Thompson leaned forward aggressively. "Sister Margaret, you're speaking like a rebellious, emotional woman who has lost all spiritual discernment. These attitudes show clearly that you've been influenced by apostate thinking, probably through your inappropriate contact with your disfellowshipped son." "You're absolutely right," I said, standing up from my chair. "I have been influenced by my son. He reminded me what real love looks like. He showed me that asking questions isn't evil, it's human. He helped me remember that God gave us minds to use, not to surrender to whatever organization claims to represent Him." I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot where I had stood countless times before meetings, greeting friends, sharing encouragement, feeling like I belonged to something special. Now I saw it for what it really was, a place where love came with conditions, where acceptance required absolute compliance, where families could be destroyed with the stroke of a pen. "Gentlemen, you want to know if I'm repentant? I am deeply repentant. I'm repentant that I wasted 50 years of my life in an organization that taught me to value rules over relationships. I'm repentant that I raised my children to fear questions instead of embracing truth. I'm repentant that I almost let you convince me to abandon my own son for the crime of thinking independently." Brother William's face had turned red with anger. "Sister Margaret, you are clearly beyond help. Your rebellious spirit and apostate thinking have corrupted you completely. We have no choice but to disfellowship you for your refusal to accept biblical discipline and your open rebellion against theocratic authority." "Good," I said simply, "because I could never again be part of an organization that demands I choose between God and my children. Real love doesn't come with conditions, real truth doesn't fear questions, and a real God wouldn't require parents to abandon their children to prove their loyalty. I walked toward the door, but turned back one final time. You know what's funny? You think you're punishing me by taking away my congregation, my friends, my position in this organization, but what you're actually doing is setting me free. Free to love my children without conditions. Free to think for myself. Free to serve God with my heart instead of a rule book. As I left that room and walked through the Kingdom Hall for the last time, I felt lighter than I had in decades. The announcement of my disfellowshipping would be made the following Tuesday, but I was already gone in every way that mattered. I drove straight to Daniel's apartment, no longer caring who saw me, no longer afraid of consequences that had already been decided. When he opened the door and saw my face, he immediately knew what had happened. "Mom, I'm so sorry. You've lost everything because of me," he said, tears streaming down his face. "Daniel," I said, pulling him into the tightest hug I had given anyone in years. "I haven't lost anything important. I've gained the most precious thing of all, the right to love my children freely." The next few months were the most challenging and liberating of my life. Robert filed for divorce, claiming that my apostasy had destroyed our marriage. Rebecca, inspired by my courage, also began questioning the organization openly and was eventually disfellowshipped for rebellious attitude. Samuel, though initially conflicted, eventually chose to leave the organization rather than lose his family. We lost our house, our congregation, most of our friends, and the life we had known for decades. But we gained something infinitely more valuable. We became a real family, bound together by unconditional love rather than conditional obedience. Daniel graduated from medical school with honors and is now a pediatrician who saves children's lives every day. Rebecca became a social worker, helping families torn apart by religious abuse. Samuel studies psychology, determined to understand how organizations control people's minds and hearts. Today, at 68 years old, I look back on my journey with no regrets. Yes, I lost 50 years to an organization that taught me to fear love and question mercy. But in losing everything I thought mattered, I found everything that actually does matter. To anyone listening to this story who might be facing similar choices, let me tell you this: love is always the right choice. Questions are not the enemy of faith. They are the gateway to real truth. And any organization that demands you choose between them and your family is not serving God. They are serving themselves. My dear friends, if this story has touched your heart, if you understand the pain of having love held hostage by religious rules, please share your own experiences in the comments below. You are not alone in this struggle, and your story matters. Hit that subscribe button, not just to support this channel, but to join a community of people who believe that love should never come with conditions, that families are sacred, and that real truth has nothing to fear from honest questions. Remember that you are worthy of love without conditions, that your questions are valid, and that choosing your family over any organization is never wrong. Thank you for listening to my story, for holding space for my pain and my healing, and for proving that love really can triumph over fear. Stay strong, stay loving, and never let anyone convince you that abandoning the people you love is somehow holy. God is love, and love never fails, even when everything else does.